He signed the divorce papers, grinning like he had just won the lottery. He did not know the judge was about to read a figure massive enough to turn that smile into a mental stroke. What destroyed him was not the $27 million, but realizing I earned every cent of it without taking a single dime from him. If you have ever been called a leech in your own home, this story is for you. My name is Tessa Monroe, and at 34 years old, I was sitting in a courtroom that felt less like a hall of justice and more like a meat locker designed to preserve the wealthy while freezing out the disposable. My palms were sweating against the polished mahogany table, leaving faint, ghostly prints on the varnish that vanished as quickly as my identity had in this marriage. The air conditioning hummed with a low, aggressive drone, circulating air that smelled of floor wax and old paper, chilling the sweat on the back of my neck. Across the aisle, my husband, Grant Langley, looked like he was about to burst into song. At 38, Grant was the golden boy of the tech world, the CEO of Northline Dynamics, and the man who is currently divorcing me with the enthusiasm of a teenager getting his braces off. He sat there in a bespoke navy suit that probably cost more than my father made in a year. His posture relaxed, his legs crossed at the ankle. He was grinning. It was not a polite, sauna smile suitable for the dissolution of a 10-year partnership. It was a wide, teeth-baring grin that stretched from ear to ear, the look of a man who had just won the lottery and was merely waiting for the check to clear. He picked up the heavy fountain pen to sign the settlement agreement, and the scratching sound it made on the paper echoed in my skull like nails on a chalkboard. His lawyer, a man named Sterling who wore a tie the color of a fresh bruise, was currently standing and addressing the judge. Sterling had a voice that sounded like oil pouring over gravel, smooth but with plenty of rough edges hidden underneath. He was painting the picture of Grant that was so saintly it was almost nauseating. Your Honor, Mr. Langley wishes to ensure that Ms. Monroe is well cared for, Sterling said, gesturing to the papers. Grant was happily defacing with his signature, despite her lack of employment history and her status as a homemaker with no significant financial contribution to the marital estate. Mr. Langley has agreed to a lump sum settlement of $50,000 along with the retention of her vehicle. We believe this is more than generous. It is a fresh start. Generous. That was the word they kept using, as if I were a charity case, as if I were a strayed dog. They were feeding one last bowl of kibble before kicking me out onto the highway. I looked down at the legal file in front of me. The summary of my life was typed out in brutal black and white Korea font. Occupation, homemaker, income zero, assets none, status dependent. They had reduced a decade of my life to those 4 words. 10 years of supporting him, of listening to his pitches, of managing his life so he could manage his code, all erased to the court and to Grant. I was a freelancer with no steady clients. I was the woman who dabbled. I was a shadow that had somehow attached itself to the brilliant sun that was Grant Langley. And now he was finally cutting me loose so he could shine without obstruction. I felt a ball of heat rising in my throat, a mixture of shame and rage that threatened to choke me. I wanted to stand up and scream that I was not a charity case. I wanted to throw the pitcher of ice water at Grant's smug, handsome face, but then I felt a heavy, steady hand on my forearm. Barrett Cole did not look like the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances or shouted on television. He looked like a grandfather who spent his weekends flying and reading history books. He had a shock of thick silver hair and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. He was the most expensive lawyer in the city, though Grant did not know that yet. I had paid his retainer in cash from a stack of bills I kept in a safety deposit box Grant did not know existed. Do not let him see you shake, Tessa, Barrett murmured, his voice so low only I could hear it. His eyes were fixed on the judge, but his grip on my arm was firm. Calm is your weapon today. Rage makes you sloppy. Silence makes you dangerous. I took a deep breath, holding the air in my lungs until they burned, then exhaled slowly through my nose. I forced the heat in my throat to cool down. I visualized the anger turning into a block of ice in the center of my chest. Cold, hard, unbreakable. I looked up. Grant was finished signing. He capped the pen with a satisfying click and pushed the documents toward the center of the table. He looked up at me then, his blue eyes dancing with mockery. It was the look one gives to an old piece of furniture they have finally managed to sell at a garage sale. He was relieved to be rid of me. He looked at me with pity, and that was worse than hate. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice so the judge would not hear, but making sure it carried across the short distance between us. "Not bad for someone who brings in zero, is it?" he whispered. "You should be happy, Tesser. You can finally go find yourself or whatever it is you do all day." The insult landed with precision. He knew exactly where to hit. He knew my insecurity about my career, my fear that I had wasted my potential supporting heads. He thought he was looking at a woman who was walking away with a pity check and a used SUV. I did not answer. I did not blink. I just stared at him, letting the silence stretch out between us. In my mind, I was not in this courtroom. I was back in my home office at 2 in the morning, staring at a spreadsheet on a laptop Grant thought I only used for Pinterest. I was thinking about the email I had printed out and placed in Barrett's leather briefcase. It was a single sheet of paper, but it carried more weight than the entire stack of documents Grant had just signed. It was my updated financial disclosure. Grant thought I was destitute. He thought I was the little wife who needed an allowance to buy groceries. He had absolutely no idea that while he was busy playing CEO and chasing his 20-something assistant, I had been building an empire right under his nose. He did not know about Harbourline Holdings. He did not know about the 27 rental properties. He did not know that the net worth of the woman sitting opposite him rivaled his own. I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. It was not a smile, not really. It was a muscle spasm of anticipation. Grant mistook it for submission. He sat back, buttoning his jacket, ready to leave. He checked his watch, a $30,000 Rolex I had bought him for his 35th birthday, using money he thought I saved from clipping coupons. "Your Honor," Barrett said. The sound of his voice stopped the proceedings just as the judge was reaching for her gavel. Judge Ellison, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every lie humanity had to offer, paused. "Yes, Mr. Cole, is there an issue with the signature?" she asked, looking over her reading glasses. "No issue with the signature, Your Honor," Barrett said, standing up slowly. He moved with the deliberate slowness of a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to run. "However, before we conclude the division of assets, there is a procedural matter we must address." Grant sighed loudly, rolling his eyes at his lawyer. He clearly thought this was a stalling tactic. He thought I was trying to squeeze another $5,000 out of him for furniture. "My client has an obligation to the court to be fully transparent regarding her financial status," Barrett continued, his voice smooth and calm. "As of this morning, there has been a significant update to MS. Monroe's asset portfolio that was not reflected in the initial filing. We would be remiss if we allowed the court to finalize this divorce based on outdated information." Sterling Grant's lawyer frowned. He looked confused. Why would the wife's lawyer be delaying a settlement that was clearly in the husband's favor? Usually, it was the wealthy spouse trying to hide money, not the dependent spouse trying to reveal it. "We have a flight to catch, Your Honor," Sterling said dismissively, "unless Ms. Monroe has suddenly found a $10 bill on the sidewalk outside the courthouse. I failed to see how a minor update warrants a delay." Grant chuckled. It was a dry, arrogant sound. Barrett ignored him. He reached into his briefcase. The sound of the leather catch snapping open seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. He pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. "I am requesting permission to file an amended financial disclosure on behalf of MS. Monroe," Barrett said. He walked toward the bench, placing the document before the judge, and then walked over to the plaintiff's table. He dropped a copy in front of Grant. It landed with a heavy thud. Grant did not even look at it at first. He was still looking at me. That smirk plastered on his face. He thought it was a joke. He thought it was a desperate plea for alimony. In his mind, I was Tesser the homemaker, Tesser the failure, Tesser who had nothing but what he gave her. He reached out a hand, manicured and steady, and flipped open the cover page. I watched his eyes. I watched the exact moment they hit the summary line. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the cold table, the ice in my chest spreading out to cool my blood. I watched as he read the first page. I saw his brow furrow slightly. He blinked as if he was trying to clear a smudge from his contact lenses. He turned to the page, then he turned to another. His smile did not disappear instantly. It froze. It became a mask that didn't fit anymore. The corners of his mouth were still turned up, but life had drained out of his face. He looked at the number. Then he looked at the name of the LOC listed at the top. Then he looked at the valuation. He was still smiling, but it was the terrifying vacant smile of a man whose brain has just encountered information it cannot process. He was looking at a ghost. He was looking at a monster. He was looking at me. And I just sat there, the invisible wife, waiting for the scream. To understand the ghost I became in that courtroom, you have to meet the woman I was 10 years ago. I was 24 years old when I met Grat. I was not a homemaker then. I was not a dependent. I was a data analyst for a mid-sized logistics firm, a job that required me to find patterns in chaos and turn numbers into narratives. I was good at it. I was sharp. I was ambitious in a quiet, steady way that did not require a megaphone. Grant was 28, a brilliant but chaotic engineer with a laptop full of code and a head full of dreams that had no grounding in reality. He had the engine of a Ferrari, but no steering wheel. That was where I came in the beginning. He did not look at me like a piece of furniture. He looked at me like I was oxygen. We spent our first year in a cramped one-bedroom apartment that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and takeout Thai food. Northline Dynamics was not a company then. It was just a folder on his desktop and a frantic energy that kept him awake for 3 days straight. But code alone does not build a business. Grant could build the most sophisticated algorithm in the world, but he had absolutely no idea how to sell it to a human being. I remember one night specifically. It was 3:00 in the morning. We were sitting on the cheap laminate floor of our living room, surrounded by whiteboards I had dragged home from an office supply store. Grant was spiraling. He was convinced the product was too complex, that nobody would buy the license fee he wanted to charge. I took the marker from his hand. Stop trying to sell them the software. Grant, I said, my voice raspy from exhaustion. Sell them the safety. Don't charge them a lump sum. They will be at the price tag. Make it a subscription. Make it a utility bill they pay every month because they cannot imagine operating without it. I drew the diagram on the board. I mapped out the customer life cycle. I sketched out the premium model where users could demo the core features for $0, getting them hooked before the paywall came down. I wrote the copy for the pitch deck, translating his technical jargon into the language of profit and efficiency that investors wanted to hear. Grant stared at the board. Then he looked at me, his eyes wide with that manic, brilliant intensity I fell in love with. You are a genius, Tess, he said, pulling me into a hug that knocked the wind out of me. You are my second brain. I swear I would be coding in a cave without you. You are the only one who gets it. He called me his co-founder in private. He called me his secret weapon. But secrets by definition are things you hide. The shift happened so slowly that I did not notice the eraser until half of me was already gone. It started with the first angel investor meeting. It was the meeting that would decide whether Northline lived or died. I had prepped Grant for weeks. I had written the script. I had anticipated every question they would ask about churn rates and acquisition costs. I wanted to be at the table. I expected to be at the table. But the morning of the meeting, Grant was jittery. He fixed his tie in the mirror and said, barely making eye contact, Tess, maybe it is better if you sit in the back today. Take notes. You know how these old school money guys are. If they see a girlfriend involved, they might think it is a mom and pop shop. We need to look corporate. We need to look singular. I felt a sting, sharp and cold, but I swallowed it. I told myself he was right. I told myself it was strategy, not exclusion. So I sat in the back row of the conference room, invisible against the beige wall, a notebook in my lap. I watched Grant stand up and deliver my presentation. I watched him point to the subscription model I had drawn on our living room floor. I listened to him explain the customer psychology I had taught him over lukewarm pizza. And then when the lead investor asked him how he came up with such a sustainable revenue model, Grant did not look at me. He did not point to the back of the room. He smiled that charming, confident smile. It was just a neat business intuition. Grant said, tapping his temple. I just realized that the market was shifting and I knew I had to pivot. It just came to me. I sat there, my pen hovering over the paper, my heart hammered against my ribs. He had stolen my words. He had claimed my mind as his own instinct. But when the investors nodded, impressed, and signed the check for $200,000, I forced myself to exhale. I told myself, it is for us. It does not matter who gets the credit as long as the company survives. We are a team. His win is my win. That was the first lie I told myself. It was the foundation upon which he built his empire, and the hole in which I buried my career. As Northline Dynamics grew, the walls around me grew taller. We moved from the apartment to a condo, then to the sprawling glass and steel house in the hills. The money poured in, but with every deposit, my role shrank. I went from second brain to support system. Then I became a wife. Grant hired a VP of sales. He hired a chief marketing officer. He hired people to do the jobs I had been doing for free in our pajamas. When I asked to be officially brought onto the payroll to have a title, he laughed. It was a gentle laugh, but it was dismissive. Babe, why would you want the stress? He asked, pouring himself a glass of vintage scotch I had bought. You have done the hard part. Now you get to enjoy life. Plan the parties, handle the contractors for the remodel. You are the face of the family. That is a full-time job. So I became the face. I organized the launch parties where he was the star. I managed the PR strategy to make him look like a benevolent tech visionary. I remembered the birthdays of his board members' wives. I booked the flights. I managed the household staff. I made sure his life was a frictionless surface he could glide across without stumbling. On paper, Northline Dynamics had one founder. In the tax returns, I was listed as spouse. The humiliation became a public spectator sport. I remember a dinner party about 3 years ago. We were at a steakhouse with 2 potential partners from a rival firm. The conversation turned to a merger, and they were discussing valuation caps. It was a complex topic, one I had read about extensively. I leaned forward, swirling my wine. Actually, I said, my voice clear, if you structure the equity split based on the EBITDA from the last quarter, you might avoid the tax liability on the grant. Cut me off. He did not shout. He did not even look angry. He just chuckled and placed his hand over mine, patting it like one would pat a confused child. Tessa is our resident expert on finding a bargain, Grant said to the table, flashing a conspiratorial grin at the other men. If you need a coupon for detergent or want to know which grocery store has the best deal on organic kale, she is your girl. But let's leave the boring business stuff to the guys, right? Honey. The table erupted in laughter. It was deep baritone masculine laughter. I froze. My mouth was still half open. I looked at the men laughing, and then I looked at Grant. He wasn't looking at me with malice. He was looking at me with total indifference. He had reduced my intellect, my strategic mind, the mind that had saved his company in its infancy, to a joke about grocery coupons. I closed my mouth. I forced the corners of my lips up. I laughed. It was a hollow, brittle sound that felt like swallowing glass. I am just looking out for the budget, I said, playing the role he had written for me. That night, I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the house felt heavy, suffocating. I realized I was vanishing. The Tessa who analyzed data, the Tessa who built strategies. She was fading away, replaced by this hollow shell of a socialite wife. I was an accessory. I was the hood ornament on the car he was driving. But the final nail in the coffin came 6 months later. It was late. I was in the kitchen drinking tea, unable to sleep. Grant was at the island eating leftovers, staring at his iPad. He was stressed about a new product line that was failing to gain traction. I had spent the day looking at the user data I could still access because he had never bothered to change his passwords, assuming I wouldn't understand it anyway. I saw the problem clearly. The interface was too clunky for the mobile demographic. Grant, I said softly. I was looking at the beater numbers today. He didn't look up. You were yes. The drop-off rate is happening at the login screen. It's too many steps. If you switch to a biometric login and remove the two-factor requirement for the trial version, you could likely increase retention by 20%. I waited. I waited for him to say, "You're right." I waited for him to say, "My second brain is back." Brand put down his fork. He turned on the stool and looked at me. His eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth they held when we were 24. There was no partnership in his gaze, only annoyance. "Tesser," he said, his voice flat and hard. "Stop," I blinked. "Stop what?" "Stop trying to play executive," he said. "You have not been in the loop for 5 years. You do not know the compliance issues. You do not know the code base. You are focusing on things you do not understand." "I understand data, Grant," I argued, my voice rising. "I built the model this company runs on." "You built a spreadsheet 10 years ago," he snapped. "That does not make you a suite executive. Look, I work 18 hours a day. I carry the weight of 300 employees on my back. When I come home, I do not want to debate strategy with my wife." He stood up, taking his plate to the sink. "You are great at the house stuff, Tess. The garden looks amazing. The garler last week was beautiful. Stick to that. Let me handle the heavy lifting. Don't try to pretend you understand business just because you slept with the CEO." He walked out of the kitchen. I stood there, gripping the edge of the marble counter until my knuckles turned white. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Just because you slept with the CEO. He had rewritten history completely. In his mind, I had never been an architect. I had just been the girl in the room. He had not just stolen my credit. He had stolen my reality. That was the night the sadness died. Sadness requires hope. It requires a belief that things might go back to the way they were. But that night, listening to his footsteps fade up the stairs, I realized there was no going back. He thought he had put me in my place. He thought he had silenced me. He was wrong. He had just given me the motivation I needed to stop building his empire and start building my own. If he wanted me to handle the house, fine. I would handle the house. I would handle every house I could get my hands on until I owned a portfolio that would make his stock options look like pocket change. I finished my tea. I washed the mug. And then I walked into his home office, sat down at his computer, and opened a new browser window. I typed 2 words into the search bar: foreclosure auctions. The ghost was done haunting the halls. It was time for the ghost to go to work. The hallway leading to Grant's home office was lined with plush runner rugs that dampened the sound of my footsteps. It was a Tuesday evening around 9:00. I was carrying a tray with a fresh pot of herbal tea and a ceramic cup, the beautiful wife playing her role to perfection. The house was silent, save for the low hum of the expensive HVAC system and the murmur of Grant's voice drifting through the cracked door. I knew he was on a call with Harlow Pierce. Harlow was not just an investor. He was a kingmaker in the tech world. If Harlow Pierce backed your Series C funding, you did not just get money, you got a coronation. Grant had been prepping for this call for a week, pacing the living room, rehearsing his vision, practicing his confident, visionary laugh. I stopped just outside the door, balancing the tray on my hip, waiting for a pause in the conversation so I could slip in, deposit the tea, and vanish like a good ghost. The speakerphone was on. I could hear Harlow's voice, growly and distorted by the connection, filling the room. The numbers looked solid. Grant Harlow said, "I like the trajectory. The user acquisition costs are down and your retention is sticky. You run a tight ship." "Thank you, Harlow." Grant replied. His voice was smooth, coated in that specific blend of humility and arrogance he reserved for men richer than him. "I have always believed that if you do not control the micro, you cannot master the macro." There was a pause. Then Harlow asked a question that made my breath itch in my throat. "What about the personal side?" Harlow asked. "I do my due diligence, Grant. I know you are married. Does the wife have a hand in the pot? Is she on the board? Does she hold voting shares? I need to know if I'm getting into bed with a husband and wife team. I don't like family drama messing up my cap table." I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the moment where he could acknowledge me. He did not have to say I was a genius. He did not have to call me a co-founder. Just a nod to the truth would have been enough. He could have said, She consults sometimes. He could have said she helped with the early strategy. I gripped the silver handles of the tray, waiting for a crumb of validation. Grant laughed. It was a dismissive, airy sound, like he was brushing lint off his jacket. "Oh," Tessergrax said, his tone light and amused. "No, no, Harlow. You do not have to worry about that. Tesser is sweet. She keeps the house beautiful, makes sure my shirts are pressed. That sort of thing." I felt a cold sensation spread through my chest, but I did not move. "She does not understand business," Brandt continued, gaining confidence. "She is not built for this world. Honestly, half the time she does not even know what the software does. She is just there. She is just there." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. They were not violent. He had not called me stupid. He had not called me, yet he had done something far worse. He had reduced my entire existence to that of a lamp or a coffee table. I was an object that occupied space. I was static. There was background noise. "She is just there." "Good," Harlow grunted. "Keep it that way. I invest in CEOs, not marriages." I did not go into the room. I turned around, my movements mechanical, and carried the tray back to the kitchen. I poured the tea down the sink. I watched the brown liquid swirl into the drain, and I felt like I was watching the last 10 years of my life disappear with it. That night, I did not cry. Crying implies that you are hurt, and hurt implies that you still care about the person who hurt you. I was hurt in the past. I was entering a state of cold clinical clarity. When Grant came to bed hours later, smelling of triumph and scotch, I pretended to be asleep. I waited until his breathing deepened into a heavy rhythmic snore. Then I slipped out of bed, took my laptop, and went to the guest room at the far end of the hall. I needed proof, not for a court, not yet. I needed proof from myself. I needed to remind myself that I was not crazy, that I was not just there. I dug into the archives of our shared cloud storage, a drive he had long forgotten I had access to. I scrolled back through the years, past the photos of vacations, past the tax returns, back to the folder labeled Project Genesis. I opened a file named Draft Grant Final V3. It was dated 7 years ago. I opened the metadata. There it was glowing in the blue light of the screen. Author Tessa Monroe. Total editing time 42 hours. I read the text. It was the original business plan for Northline. I recognized the phrasing. I recognized the cadence of the sentences. The market does not need another tool. It needs a habitat. That was my line. I remembered writing it while sitting on the floor of our old apartment, eating cold noodles while Grant paced around panic-stricken that he would never make it. I opened another file, the pricing model. Author Tessa Monroe. Another, the initial investor pitch deck. Author Tessa Monroe. I was not just there. I was the foundation. I was the architect. He was living in a skyscraper that I had designed, and he had convinced himself that he had laid every brick with his own 2 hands. A few weeks later, the insult compounded, as it always does. I was syncing our family calendar on the iPad when a message popped up. It was not a text. It was a notification from a secure messaging app Grant thought he had hidden deep in a subfolder. "Leaner, the presentation went great. You were amazing up there. Also, I left my earring in your car. Nooks, Roman 20 Leaner." I knew who she was. She was 24, polished, aggressive, and currently serving as his executive assistant. She was the cliché, the younger, shinier version of what he thought he deserved. I read the message, and strangely, I did not feel the crushing weight of heartbreak I expected. I did not feel jealous of her youth or her beauty. I felt a flash of rage, but it was not about the sex. If he wanted to sleep with someone else, that was a betrayal of our vows. Yes, but what burned me, what truly set my blood on fire, was the first part of her text. The presentation went great. He was sharing his work with her. He was letting her into the boardroom. He was respecting her professional opinion. He was likely looking at her with that shine in his eyes, the one he used to save for me because he saw her as a peer, while I was just the housekeeper who happened to share his bed. He was cheating on me physically. Sure, but he had been cheating on me intellectually for years. He had taken the partnership we promised each other and given the respect to strangers while leaving me with the scraps of domestic drudgery. I confronted him 3 days later. It was a Saturday morning. We were in the kitchen. He was rushing to get to a golf game with a client. I am not going to book the tickets for the Aspen retreat, I said calmly, buttering my toast. Grant sobbed, his keys jingling in his hand. But why? That is your job, Tess. It is not my job, Grant, I said, looking up at him. I am not your secretary. Ask Cleaner to do it. She seems to be handling a lot of your personal affairs lately anyway. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Grant's face went through a complex series of gymnastic shock, guilt, then quickly settling into defensive anger. You went through my phone, he accused, his voice dropping an octave. I ignored the question. I am tired, Grant. I am tired of being treated like an employee. You do not have to pay. I built the strategy for the Alpha launch. I designed the subscription tier that got you the Series B. And yet to you, I am just the woman who picks up the dry cleaning. Grant let out a groan, running a hand down his face. Oh my God, Tessa, are we doing this again? You are rewriting history. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. Am I rewriting history? The metadata is on the files. Grant, my name is on the original docs. Grant laughed. It was a cruel, pitying sound. Babe, you helped with some typos. You brainstormed a little. That is what supportive partners do. But do not stand there and pretend you were running the company. You are exaggerating your role to make yourself feel better. You are not a businessman. Tesser, you are a nurturer. That is your strength. He walked over and tried to put his hands on my shoulders. I stepped back. Look, I'm sorry if you feel unappreciated, he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. I will buy you that bracelet you were looking at, the cardio one. Okay, I know I have been busy. I know I have been stressed, but do not invent a reality where you are Steve Jobs. It is not healthy. He checked his watch. I have to go. We will talk about this later and have Leah book the tickets. She is paid to do it. You are my wife. You should just relax. He kissed me on the cheek, a dry, meaningless peck, and walked out the door. I stood in the kitchen for a long time. The spot on my cheek where he had kissed me felt like it was burning. He believed it. That was the most terrifying part. He wasn't just lying to me. He had successfully gaslighted himself in his version of the world. I really was useless. I really was just a decorative object that required maintenance in the form of jewelry and vacations. Even his apology was a manipulation, a way to pat me on the head and send me back to my corner. I walked out of the kitchen and into the master bathroom. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I looked at the woman reflected there. She looked tired. She looked small. She looked like exactly what Grant said. She was a wife who was just there, but behind the eyes, something was shifting. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It was the same part of my brain that had analyzed the market data 10 years ago. It was the part of me that saw patterns, identified weaknesses, and exploited them. Grant Langley had made a fatal error. He had assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. He assumed that because I was invisible, I was blind. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cold marble of the vanity. I stared directly into my own pupils. If with you, I am just furniture, I whispered to the empty room, my voice trembling slightly before steadying into steel. Then I will become the person who owns the house. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would not fight him for scraps of affection or credit. I would take the one thing he actually respected. I would take the money. I walked back to the bedroom, pulled my laptop out from under the bed, and opened a new browser tab. I did not search for marriage counselors. I did not search for divorce lawyers. Not yet. I typed in a search query that would change everything. How to form an LLC without a spouse's signature. The ghost was done haunting. It was time to start hunting. Most people think real estate empires are built in boardrooms with handshakes and glasses of scotch. Mine was built on the smell of bleach, cheap coffee, and the terrifying realization that I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. It started with a memory when I was a little girl. My mother was a small-time real estate agent. She did not sell the mansions on the hill. She sold the sad, broken little boxes in the valley. I used to tag along with her on weekends, holding her clipboard while she walked through foreclosures. I learned early on that a house is not a home. It is a structure held together by wood, nails, and debt. I knew how to spot water damage on a ceiling before I knew how to do long division. I knew that the smell of fresh paint usually meant someone was trying to hide black mold. That knowledge had been dormant for 20 years, buried under the layers of being Mrs. Brent Angley. But after the night, I heard Grant call me just there. The door conceit ended. I became obsessed. While Grant was downstairs watching the market, close on CNBC, I was upstairs on my laptop, scouring the county tax sale websites. It became my pornography. I scrolled through lists of liens and seized properties with a hunger I had never felt for jewelry or clothes. It was not just about money. It was a logic puzzle. It was a way to escape. I needed a vehicle. I could not buy property under my own name. Grant's lawyers would sniff it out in a heartbeat. Or worse, Grant would see it on a credit report and laugh at me. So, I formed a limited liability company. I called it Harbor Line Holdings, LLC. Harbor was my mother's maiden name. Line was the only part of North Line I felt I had a right to take. I rented a post office box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I opened a business checking account using the modest savings I had kept in a separate account from before our marriage money. Grant called cute, and then I found it. It was a duplex in the industrial district about 40 minutes from our pristine gated community. It was a foreclosure bank owned, and it looked like it had been through a war. The siding was peeling. The porch sagged like a frowning mouth, and the lawn was mostly dead weeds and broken glass. The asking price was $42,000. To Grant, $42,000 was a rounding error on a quarterly report. To me, it was everything I had. I went to a credit union where nobody knew who my husband was. I sat across from a loan officer named Brinder, who looked at my lack of recent employment history with skepticism. I had to use my personal credit score, which was excellent thanks to years of managing the household bills meticulously, and I put down a massive chunk of my savings as a down payment. I took a personal loan for the rest at 12% interest. It was a terrible rate, a predatory rate, but I signed the papers with a shaking hand because it was my debt. When the lawyer for the bank handed me the keys, he smirked. "Good luck with that one, lady," he said. "I hope you know how to handle squatters." I did not know how to handle squatters. I did not know how to handle anything, but I took the keys and I drove my luxury SUV to a neighborhood where I immediately felt the need to lock the doors. That first month was a masterclass in humility. I lived a double life Monday through Friday. I was the perfect wife. I arranged flowers. I hosted dinners. I nodded politely when Grant talked about his genius. But on Saturdays and Sundays, I told Grant I was taking a pottery class or going to a weekend yoga retreat. Instead, I drove to the duplex, parked around the corner so nobody would vandalize my car, and changed into oversized overalls and a bandana. The place smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The carpets were so stained they looked like abstract art. I spent 3 weekends just scrubbing. I scrubbed until my hands were raw and my nails were broken. I learned that tritium phosphate cleans nicotine off walls better than anything else. I learned that if you paint a room agreeable gray, it instantly looks worth $200 more a month. I made friends with the locals because I had to. I met a plumber named S at the hardware store who taught me how to replace a P-trap without flooding the kitchen. I met a carpenter named Mike who agreed to fix the porch for cash if I bought the lumber. They did not know I was the wife of a tech CEO. They just thought I was a crazy woman trying to flip a dump, but arrogance is a dangerous thing, and I got cocky. I needed the bathroom in the lower unit. The quote from the professional contractor was $3,000. I booked. I was bleeding cash. So, I went on a classifieds website and hired a guy named Rick who said he could do it for $800. It was the classic mistake of the amateur. Rick showed up, ripped out the old toilet, laid the tile crooked, and then vanished. But he did not just vanish. He left the water valve to the toilet supply line slightly loose. I came back 2 days later to find water pouring through the ceiling of the basement. The subfloor was soaked. The drywall downstairs was ruined. I sat in the middle of the wet, molding living room floor, surrounded by the smell of damp rot, and I put my head in my hands. I had just lost $4,000 in repairs to save $2,200. I sat there and I cried. Not the silent, dignified tears I cried in my marriage, but ugly gasping sobs. I thought Grant was right. I am useless. I am playing dress up. I am going to bankrupt myself, and he is going to have to bail me out, and he will laugh. I almost quit. I took out my phone to call the bank and ask how to surrender the property. But before I dialed, I called Jade. Jade was my best friend from college. She was a forensic accountant for a mid-sized logistics firm, the kind of person who found comfort in spreadsheets and terrified people with her calculator. She was the only person who knew about Harbor Line. I picked up the phone sobbing. I ruined it. Jade, I choked out. I flooded the house. I am in the hole. I am an idiot. Jade did not coddle me. She did not say, "Oh, poor baby. How much is the damage?" She asked. Her voice was calm, clicking away on a keyboard in the background. 5,000, maybe 6. I wailed. Okay, Jade said. And what is the projected rent for both units? 1,200 for the top. Maybe 900 for the bottom if I fix the water damage. I sniffled. Jade paused. Okay, so you are looking at 2,100 a month gross income. Your mortgage on the terrible loan is 600. Taxes and insurance are another 300 even with the repair costs. Tesser, you break even in month 7. By year 2, you are cash positive. She stopped typing. Listen to me, Tesser. Real estate is not a get-rich scheme. It is a get-rich-slow scheme. You made a mistake. You paid the stupid tax. Everyone pays the stupid tax on their first deal. Now dry your eyes, fire Rick, hire a real plumber, and fix the damn floor. Profit is not in the first month. The profit is in year 5. Do not look at the water. Look at the spreadsheet. I hung up the phone. I wiped my face with my dirty sleeve. I looked at the water damage. It was not a disaster. It was a line item. It was a cost of doing business. I hired S. the plumber to fix the leak. I paid the extra money for a real contractor to fix the floor. I maxed out my personal credit card to buy the materials. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for lunch to save money. 6 weeks later, I placed a for rent sign in the yard. I did not get wealthy professionals. I got a single mom named Carla for the downstairs unit who worked 2 jobs and paid in cash. I got a young mechanic named Dave for the upstairs unit. When Carla handed me the first envelope of cash, $920s and 10s, my hands were shaking. It was not a lot of money. It was less than what Grant spent on a single dinner with clients. But I held that envelope against my chest like it was a gold bar. I drove home that night, exhausted, smelling of paint thinner and accomplishment. I sat in my car in the driveway of our $10 million mansion, looking at the glowing windows where my husband was probably sleeping. Oblivious to the fact that his wife had just become a landlady, I pulled the deed to the property out of my glove compartment. I turned on the overhead light and looked at it. Ona Harbor Line Holdings, LLC, authorized signatory Tesser Monroe. There was no Mrs. Gage Grant Langley. There was no Grant Langley. There was just me. I traced my finger over my signature. It looked stronger than I remembered. It looked sharp. For the first time in years, I did not feel like a guest in my own life. I realized something profound in that dark driveway. Grant used money to control people. He used it to buy silence, to buy loyalty, to buy admiration. But this money, the $900 in my purse, this was not for control. This was for freedom. I realized that if I could do this once, I could do it again. If I could survive a flooded basement and a scam artist contractor, I could survive anything. I looked at the house, Grant's house, and whispered to the windshield, "If you do not want to write my name on anything we build, Grant, that is fine. I will just write it myself." I tucked the deed back into the glove box, locked the car, and walked into the house. When Grant asked me the next morning how my yoga retreat was, I looked him dead in the eye, smiled, and said it was transformative. "You have no idea how flexible I am becoming." He just laughed and went back to his newspaper. He had no clue that the woman pouring his coffee had just laid the first brick of the wall that would eventually shut him out. The next 6 years of my life were a masterclass in deception, played out in the space between a lie and a closing statement. If you asked Grant what I was doing during those years, he would tell you with a patronizing smile that I had finally found my center. He would tell you that I had become a devote of hot yoga on Tuesday nights and that I had developed a passionate, albeit messy, interest in pottery on Saturday mornings. He thought I was finding inner peace. In reality, I was finding distressed assets. The yoga mat I carried out to the car every Tuesday evening was actually a roll of blueprints for a triplex I was renovating in the warehouse district. The pottery class I attended on Saturdays was actually a standing appointment with my general contractor, a gruff man named Miller who smoked cigarettes that smelled like maple syrup and who taught me how to spot a low-bearing wall from 20 feet away. I was not doing yoga. I was doing the BR strategy. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. It became a rhythm, a heartbeat, that thumped louder than my own marriage. I would buy a terrifyingly ugly house with my growing capital. I would renovate it just enough to make it safe and clean. I would rent it out to tenants who were desperate for a landlord who actually fixed the heat. Then I would go to the bank, show them the new appraisal value, refinance the property, pull my original cash out, and use it to buy the next one. It was an addiction. It was a game of Monopoly, where the pieces were real and the jail was bankrupt. Grant, of course, was oblivious. He was too busy chasing his IPO to notice that his wife's car odometer was racking up miles that did not correlate to the distance between our house and the yoga studio. I remember a specific cocktail party about 3 years into my secret life. It was at the home of a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I was standing next to Grant, wearing a dress that cost more than the monthly rent of my first duplex, holding a glass of champagne I did not want. Grant was holding court, surrounded by 3 junior partners who looked at him like he was a deity. "You have to find a balance," Grant was saying, gesturing with his glass. "Take Tessar here. She used to stress about everything. Now she is practically a yogi every Tuesday. Religiously, it keeps her grounded. Right, babe?" He squeezed my shoulder. It was a possessive squeeze, the kind a child gives a favorite toy. I smiled. It was my practiced, vapid smile. "Absolutely," I said. "It is amazing what a little deep breathing can do for your perspective." As I said it, my phone buzzed in my clutch purse. It was a notification from my property management software. Rent received Unit 4B, $1,200. Grant turned back to the men. "It is good for her to have a hobby. Keeps her busy while I'm dealing with the sharks." My phone buzzed again. Rent received the duplex on Elm, $1,800. And again, rent received the bungalow on Fifth, $1,500. While Grant was bragging about how well he managed his wife's time, I was standing there silently collecting $4,500 in gross revenue in under 2 minutes. The irony was so rich I could taste it, sharper than the champagne. But it was not all victory laps and secret smiles. There were moments where the house of cards almost collapsed. In the 4th year, the local economy took a nosedive. A major manufacturing plant, 2 towns over shut down, and suddenly the working-class tenants I relied on were out of jobs. I had just closed on my biggest risk yet, an 8-unit apartment building that I had leveraged to the hilt to buy. I called it the Fortress. It was supposed to be my crown jewel. Instead, it became my nightmare. Within 2 months, 5 of the 8 units went vacant. My cash flow, which had been a steady river, dried up into a muddy trickle. The mortgage, however, did not care about the local economy. The bank wanted their $4,000 a month, rain or shine. I stopped sleeping. I would lie in bed next to Grant, listening to him grind his teeth in his sleep, and I would do mental math until the sun came up. I was hemorrhaging money. I had to dip into my personal credit cards, the ones Grant did not know about, just to pay the mortgage. I was terrified that one missed payment would trigger a credit alert that would somehow land on Grant's desk. I was drowning, and I could not scream for help because the person sleeping next to me was the one person I could not tell. One rainy afternoon, Jade came over. She found me sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by paper scraps, my hair unwashed, looking at a terrifying red number on my spreadsheet. Jade sat down her bag and made a pot of coffee. She sat down opposite me and pulled the papers toward her. She studied them for 10 minutes in silence. "You are panicking," Jade said. Her voice was level. "I am going to lose it, Jade," I whispered. "I am going to lose the fortress. And if I lose that, the bank calls the loans on the other 3 properties because they are cross-collateralized. It is a domino effect. I am going to be exposed. Grant will find out and he will look at me with that smirk and say, 'I told you so.'" Jade looked me in the eye. "He won't," she said, "because you are not going to lose it." She pointed to the rental rates. "You are trying to charge market rate in a crash. Tesser, you are arrogant. You think your product is worth 1,200 because that is what the spreadsheet says. But the market says nobody has 1,200. Drop the rent to 900, but I will barely break even," I protested. Jade slammed her hand on the table. "Profit is not the goal right now," she hissed. "Survival is the goal. If you survive the winter, you own the spring. You drop the rent. You offer free Wi-Fi. You fix the leaky faucets the same day they call. You become the best damn landlord in the county. You lose money on paper for 6 months, so you can keep the asset for 60 years. I listened to her. I swallowed my pride. I lowered the rent. I offered a free month of rent for a 12-month lease. I personally went to the building and painted the hallways a bright, cheerful yellow to make it look less like a prison. It worked. The units filled up. The bleeding stopped. I was not making a profit, but I was covering the debt. I survived the winter, and when the spring came, when the economy turned 2 years later, I raised the rents back up, and I had a waiting list of tenants who knew that I was the only landlord who actually cared. By year 6, the hobby had become a monster. I owned 27 units. I had single-family homes, duplexes, and the fortress, which was now fully occupied and generating a steady $6,000 a month in pure profit. I had built a system. I had a property manager named Saul who handled the late-night calls about clogged toilets so I could sleep. I had a tax strategist named Helen who helped me navigate the complex world of depreciation and write-offs, ensuring that on paper my taxable income looked modest even though my equity was skyrocketing. I looked at the consolidated balance sheet one night in the guest room. The estimated market value of the Harbor Line portfolio was $27.8 million. I sat back in my chair. I Googled Northline Dynamics. Grant's company had paid out a dividend that year. His share was substantial. Yes, but after his lavish spending, his cars, his trips, and his ego investments, his liquid net worth was actually lower than mine. Grant still thought our joint account was fine because he kept dumping his bonuses into it. He never noticed that I barely touched it. He never noticed that the groceries, the gas, the clothes I bought, I was paying for them with the dividends from my own empire. I was subsidizing his lifestyle, and he thought he was supporting me. But the smartest thing I did was not buy the houses. It was buying an insurance policy. 3 years before the divorce, long before I found the emails to his lawyer, I made an appointment with Barrett Cole. I walked into his office wearing a wig and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous, like a character in a bad spy movie. "I need to know something," I told him, placing a stack of deeds on his desk. "I am married. My husband thinks I am a housewife. I bought all of these through an LLC using funds I can trace back to premarital savings and my own separate credit. If we divorce, can he touch them?" Barrett had looked at the deeds. Then he looked at me. He took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "In this state," he said, his voice growly and calm, "income from separate property remains separate property, provided you have never commingled the funds. Did you ever deposit a rent check into a joint account?" I said never. "Did he ever pay for a repair?" "No." "Did he ever sign a document?" "He does not even know they exist." Barrett smiled. It was a shark smile, but it was a shark that was on my side. "Then, Mrs. Monroe," he said, using my maiden name, "you have built a fortress, and if he tries to storm it, we will bury him in the moat." So when Grant started making jokes about my pottery class at dinner parties, I stopped feeling angry. I started feeling a dark, warm satisfaction. Let him think I was shaping clay. I was shaping a future where I would never have to ask him for permission to exist ever again. I was building a nuclear bomb of financial independence, and I was sitting on the trigger, just waiting for him to give me a reason to press it. It was not a lipstick stain on a collar or a text message from a woman named Leaner that ended my marriage. It was a PDF attachment sent at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was in Grant's home office looking for charging cable. His iPad was sitting on the desk, the screen glowing with a notification. Usually, I would never look. I respected his privacy, largely because I was too busy building my own private world to care about him. But the subject line of the email caught my eye. It was from his lead counsel. Sterling subject, asset protection, IPO strategy, Monroe settlement. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I touched the screen. Grant, in his infinite arrogance, had not changed his passcode in 6 years. It was still his birthday. I opened the email chain and read, Grant, we need to move fast. The S1 filing for the IPO goes public in 4 months. I cannot have a messy divorce dragging down the share price. I need her out before the roadshow starts. Sterling understood. What is the exposure? Does she have any significant assets in her name? Any business interests? Grant, 0. She has nothing. A few thousand in a savings account. I give her an allowance for. She dabbles in hobbies, pottery, yoga, but nothing that generates income. She has no equity in anything. She is risk-free. I can settle with a lump sum. Give her enough for a condo and a used car, and she will be fine. She is used to living simply. And then the kicker, the sentence, that turned my blood into liquid nitrogen. Grant, is there a way to structure the separation so that my future equity in Northline is completely shielded? I do not want her getting a windfall just because she was sleeping in my bed while I built this company. I want to minimize the payout to the absolute floor. She is a liability I need to shed. I stood there in the silent office reading those words again and again. She is a liability. She has nothing. It was not just divorcing me. He was strategizing how to discard me as cheaply as possible, like he was negotiating a vendor contract for office supplies. He wanted to ensure that the woman who helped write his original business plan walked away with nothing but a pat on the head. I did not scream. I did not throw the iPad across the room. The time for emotion had passed years ago. This was now a business transaction. I forwarded the entire email chain to my secure encrypted email account. Then I deleted the forwarded message from his sent folder. I wiped the iPad screen with the hem of my shirt to remove my fingerprints and placed it back exactly where I found it. I walked to my own laptop, logged in, and forwarded the chain to Barrett Cole with a subject line that consisted of 3 words. It is time. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Barrett's office. The room smelled of old leather and expensive cologne. Barrett sat behind his massive oak desk reading the printed emails. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I saw a muscle in his jaw tighten. He is underestimating you, Barrett said, placing the paper down. That is good. Arrogance causes sloppy mistakes. He thinks you are a dependent. He is filing for divorce based on the assumption that you are financially helpless. I reached into my tote bag, a battered canvas bag that Grant hated because it looked cheap, and pulled out 3 3-ring binders. I placed them on the desk with a heavy thud. This is Harboline Holdings, I said. Barrett opened the first binder. It contained the formation documents, the operating agreement, and the bank records showing the initial funding came from my premarital savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother that I had kept separate. He opened the second binder. It contained the deeds to 27 properties. He opened the third binder. It contained the tax returns, the profit and loss statements, and the debt service schedules. Barrett flipped through the pages. He stopped at a page showing the cash flow from the fortress, my 8-unit apartment complex. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. You did this? He asked. Alone. I nodded. I used a separate mailing address, separate bank accounts. I never used a joint credit card for a single mail or can of paint. I never discussed it with him. I never used his name to secure a loan. Every dollar is traced. Barrett leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. Tesser, he said softly, this is a fortress. In this state, separate property is separate property. If you can prove, which these binders do, that you never commingled funds, that you never used marital assets to maintain these properties, then Grant cannot touch them. But more importantly, he tapped the email from Grant. He is filing a financial affidavit, swearing that you have no assets. He is going to stand before a judge and claim you are destitute to justify a low settlement. When we reveal this, when we show the court that you are a successful real estate investor, it destroys his credibility. It proves he does not know his own wife. It proves his liability narrative is a fiction. He paused. But we have to be careful. If he finds out about this now, he will try to claim that he used his money. He will try to freeze your accounts. He will bury you in motions to delay the IPO just to spite you. So what do? I asked. We wait, Barrett said. We let him file. We let him put his lies on the record. We let him offer you the insultingly low settlement. We let him think he is winning. And then at the very last moment, during the final disclosure phase, we dropped the hammer. I agreed. But there was one more thing. I reached into the pocket of my binder and pulled out a letter I had received just yesterday. It was on thick cream-colored stationery from a real estate private equity firm based in Chicago. They had been tracking my portfolio. They liked my acquisition strategy. They liked my cap rates. Barrett took the letter. He read the offer. We are prepared to offer an all-cash buyout of the Harbourline portfolio for a sum of $27,880,000. Barrett let out a low whistle. $28 million, he murmured. He looked at me with new respect. Tesser, do you realize what this is? This is a nuclear bomb. This valuation rivals his liquid cash position. If we introduce this letter in court, it is not just about asset division. It is about power. You are not asking for a piece of his pie. You have your own bakery. I stared at the letter. $28 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract, but it wasn't abstract. It was the sum total of every weekend I spent scrubbing grout, every fight with a contractor, every sleepless night worrying about occupancy rates. I do not want to sell, I told Barrett. Not yet. And I do not want to bankrupt him. I do not want to destroy the North Line. That company was my baby too once. Then what do you want? Barrett asked. I want the record set straight. I said, my voice steady. I want him to sit in that courtroom and listen to the judge read that number. I want him to know that while he was dismissing me as a housewife, I was outperforming his SP 500 index fund. I want his smile to break. Barrett nodded. Then we sandbag him. We keep Harbourline completely off the preliminary discussions. We let him think he is negotiating with a pauper. Grant filed for divorce 3 days later. He did it with a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He sat me down in the living room, pouring me a glass of wine, looking mournful. Tesser, he said, sighing heavily, we have grown apart. My work and the company consumes me. It is not fair to you. You deserve someone who can be present. I think it is best if we separate. He did not mention the IPO. He did not mention the liability. He framed it as an act of mercy, releasing me from the burden of his success. I looked at him, and for a split second I almost felt sorry for him. He was so convinced of his own narrative. He really believed he was the benevolent king granting freedom to a peasant. I understand. Grant, I said, keeping my voice small, if that is what you want. His relief was palpable. He pushed a folder toward me. I had my lawyers draw up a preliminary agreement. He said quickly, it is very generous. You keep the SUV. I will give you a lump sum of $50,000 to get settled, and I will cover your health insurance for 6 months. $50,000 for 10 years of my life, for the business plan that launched his career, for emotional labor. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to laugh in his face. $50,000 was less than the down payment I had just put on a commercial warehouse downtown. I picked up the papers. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the trap snapping shut. I will need to have a lawyer look at this, I said. Grant waved his hand dismissively. Of course, but tell them to be realistic, Tesser. The company is all tied up in stock. I am cash poor right now. This is the best I can do. He was lying through his teeth. I knew exactly how much cash he had. I knew about the offshore accounts, but I nodded. Okay, Grant, I will tell them. Over the next few weeks, I played the role of the defeated wife perfectly. Barrett sent emails to Sterling asking for minor concessions. Can she keep the furniture in the guest room? Can she get an extra $5,000 for moving expenses? Grant agreed to these tiny requests with the magnanimity of a saint. He told our mutual friends, poor Tesser. She is struggling with the reality of it, but I'm trying to make it easy for her. I am giving her everything she asks for. He thought he was managing me. He thought the silence from my end was submission. He had no idea that while he was bragging to his board about how cleanly he was handling his personal restructuring, I was sitting in a conference room with a forensic accountant and an independent auditor finalizing the valuation report of Harbourline Holdings. I was not struggling. I was sharpening the blade. The night before the final court hearing, Grant came home late. I was packing some boxes in the hallway props for the theater I was performing. He stopped and looked at me. He looked almost triumphant. Tomorrow is the big day, he said. You will be free, Tesser. You can finally pursue whatever it is you do. That yoga class, I taped the box shut. The sound of the tape gun was loud and harsh in the quiet hallway. Yes, Grant, I said, standing up and looking him in the eye. I am really looking forward to tomorrow. I think you are going to be surprised by how much I have grown. He laughed. You are cute. Tess, try to get some sleep. You look tired. He walked past me up the stairs to the master bedroom I would never sleep in again. I watched him go. He thought he was walking toward a victory lap. He did not know he was walking off a cliff. I went to my car and retrieved the briefcase Barrett had given me. Inside was the amended financial disclosure. I ran my fingers over the cover page. Tomorrow the cute wife will die, and the CEO of Harbourline Holdings would take the stand. In legal warfare, silence is not empty. Silence is a strategy. The discovery phase of a high-asset divorce is usually a shouting match. Both sides demand documents, accuse the other of hiding funds, and fight over every bank statement. I played it differently. I played it like a ghost. The law required both of us to submit a preliminary financial disclosure. This is the first card you play in the poker game. It is a sworn statement of what you own and what you owe. Lying on this document is perjury, but omitting things that are technically not yet relevant is simply strategy. I filled out my preliminary disclosure with the meticulous handwriting of a woman who has nothing to hide because she has nothing to show. I listed my personal checking account, which held $4,300. I listed my 10-year-old jewelry. I listed the SUV that was in my name. I listed my credit card debt, which I kept intentionally low on my personal cards. It was the financial portrait of a dependent housewife. It was the truth, but it was a very specific slice of the truth. It was the bait. Barrett explained the logic to me in his office, his voice low and steady. We need Grant to feel safe. Barrett said, if he thinks you are coming after his company, he will circle the wagons. He will hire better lawyers. He will bury us in paper. But if he looks at this disclosure and sees a woman who is barely scraping by, he will get sloppy. He will get greedy. And Grant did exactly that because he thought I was financially illiterate. Grant assumed I would not hire a forensic accountant. He assumed I would just take his word for what Northline Dynamics was worth. He was wrong. I had hired a man named Arthur, a forensic specialist who used to work for the IRS, tracking money laundering schemes. Arthur did not look like a spy. He looked like a high school math teacher, complete with elbow patches and thick glasses. But Arthur could track $1 through a hurricane. While I was quietly renovating a bungalow on the east side, Arthur was tracking Grant's movements. He is moving fast. Arthur told us during a strategy meeting 3 weeks after Grant filed. He is transferring stock options to a trust in his sister's name. He just opened an account in Nevada that he failed to list on his disclosure. He is actively trying to lower his net worth on paper before the final settlement. Grant was hiding assets. He was trying to cheat the poor housewife out of the scraps he thought she deserved. We let him do it. We watched him dig his own grave. We waited until the deadline for his final disclosure passed. Once he signed that document, swearing under penalty of perjury that he had disclosed everything, the trap was set. If we revealed my assets too early, he would have amended his filing, claimed it was an oversight, and reorganized his defense. But once his file was locked, he was committed to his lie. Now it was my turn to update. The process of compiling the amended financial disclosure for Tessa Monroe was like assembling a weapon of mass destruction. For 2 weeks, my dining room table ceased to be a place for eating. It became a command center. Jade took time off work to help me. Barrett sent 2 junior associates. We had appraisers, tax specialists, and auditors coming in and out of my house at all hours. We had to value everything. We needed current market appraisals for all 27 properties. We needed the rent rolls. We needed the profit and loss statements for Harborline Holdings. We needed to calculate the equity after debt service. The numbers were staggering. When you look at buildings one by one, they just look like bricks and mortar. But when you stack 27 of them on top of each other in a spreadsheet, they look like an empire. We separated the assets carefully. Barrett was obsessive about the tracing. We created a visual flowchart for every single property showing exactly where the down payment came from. Property 142, Oak Street. Down payment, $12,000. Source personal savings account. Premarital mortgage. Harborline. Commercial loan. Rant Langley's contribution 0. We did this 27 times. It was tedious, exhausting work. My eyes burned from staring at screens. My fingers were stained with ink. But with every page we finalized, I felt lighter. I was not just compiling data. I was reclaiming my identity. And then, in the middle of the chaos, we found the knife. It was Tuesday night. Jade was cross-referencing my commercial holdings with a list of vendors Grant used for Northline. She stopped typing. She frowned. She adjusted her glasses and leaned closer to the screen. Tessa, Jade said, "Come look at this." I walked over. On the screen was a lease agreement. Northline Dynamics rents their secondary server facility and overflow office space in the downtown Commerce Park. Jade said they pay $12,500 a month in rent. I nodded. I knew the building. It was a nondescript gray block near the highway. "Look at the landlord," Jade said, pointing to the line. "Landlord Apex Commercial Group, LLC." I stared at it. I knew Apex. Apex was a real estate syndicate I had bought into 3 years ago. I owned 40% of that syndicate. It was a passive investment, one I rarely thought about because the checks just showed up automatically. My brain made the connection, and the sheer absurdity of it made me laugh out loud. Grant was paying rent to Apex. Apex was paying dividends to Harborline. Harbor was me. For 3 years, Grant had been writing checks that effectively went into my pocket. He was paying his wife to house his servers, and he had absolutely no idea. Jade looked at me, her eyes wide. "Do we use this? Do we tell him? This is humiliating, Tessa. If you say this in court, he will never recover." I thought about it. I thought about the just their comment. I thought about him telling his friends I was a burden. I could use this. I could make a joke about it in the filing. I could add a footnote thanking him for being such a reliable tenant. "No," I said. Jade looked surprised. "No, no jokes," I said, my voice cold. "We do not need to twist the knife. The fact is the knife. We just list it. We list the income source. Tenant Northline Dynamics. We let him do the math. We let him realize on his own that he has been funding the very thing he despises. We included it. Item number 42 in the income section. Passive income from commercial lease Northline Dynamics. The day before the hearing, the document was finished. I went to Barrett's office to sign it. The document was not a few sheets of paper. It was a binder. It was 3 in thick. It was heavy. It sat on his mahogany desk like a brick of gold. Barrett looked at it, then at me. "This is it, Tessa," he said. "This is the point of no return. Once we file this tomorrow morning, the world changes. He thinks you are a chateau. Tomorrow, he's going to see exactly how much that shadow costs." He flipped to the back of the binder. Tucked away in the exhibits was the letter from the Chicago private equity firm, offered to purchase $27,840,000. "Are you sure you want to include the buyout offer?" Barrett asked. "We do not have to. It is just an offer, not a realized gain. Include it. I said it validates the valuation. It proves this is not just my fantasy number. It proves that real institutional money thinks I built something valuable. I want him to see that number. I want him to see what he called nothing. I signed the cover page. Tessa Monroe, sole member, Harbaline Holdings, LC. That night, I went back to the house, Grant's house, one last time. I wandered through the rooms. I looked at the expensive art he had bought to impress people he did not like. I looked at the furniture I had picked out, which he had called fine. I went to the guest room and lay down on the bed. I thought I would be terrified. I thought I would be shaking with nerves about the confrontation, but I was not scared. I felt the way a marathon runner feels at the starting line. I felt the way an architect feels when the ribbon is about to be cut. Grant came home late again. I heard him whistling downstairs. He was happy. He thought he had won. He thought he had tricked me into a $50,000 settlement. He was probably already planning how to spend the money he thought he had saved. I lay in the dark, listening to his confident footsteps. And for the first time in 10 years, I did not feel small. I closed my eyes and visualized the binder sitting on the table in the courtroom. I visualized the look on his face when he opened it. The trap was not a hole in the ground. It was a stack of paper, and he was walking straight into it, grinning ear to ear. I slept for 2 hours, and they were the most peaceful 2 hours of my life. When I woke up, the sun was rising. It was a cold, clear morning. It was a good day for a revolution. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, as if the oxygen had been sucked out by the sheer magnitude of Grant's ego. We were back in the present moment, the timeline catching up to the inevitable collision. Grant's lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was standing at the podium, buttoning his suit jacket with the flourish of a man who believes he has just delivered a closing argument for the history books. He had spent the last 20 minutes outlining the settlement agreement, a document that was less of a negotiation and more of a dictation. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice dripping with false benevolence. "My client, Mr. Langley, recognizes that Ms. Monroe has become accustomed to a certain lifestyle despite her lack of contribution to the marital estate. Therefore, in the spirit of an amicable separation, Mr. Langley is prepared to offer a lump sum payment of $50,000. He paused, letting the number hang in the air as if it were a fortune. Additionally, Sterling continued, Ms. Monroe will retain ownership of the 2015 SUV currently in her possession, and as a gesture of goodwill, Mr. Langley agrees to transfer 2,000 shares of Northline Dynamics common stock to her name. These shares will be subject to a 7-year lockup period to ensure market stability. Of course, the 7-year lockup. In 7 years, those shares could be worth millions, or they could be worth less than the paper they were printed on. It was a hollow gift. It was a leash. Sterling turned to look at me, smiling the way one smiles at a slow child. "We believe this allows Ms. Monroe to make a fresh start. It is, frankly, generous." Grant, sitting next to him, was beaming. He picked up the heavy fountain pen again. He signed the final page of the settlement offer with a flourish, the scratch of the nib loud in the quiet room. He looked like a man who had just tipped a waitress $100 on a $20 check and expected a round of applause. He capped the pen and leaned toward me. The distance between our tables was only a few feet, but it felt like an ocean. He lowered his voice, keeping his eyes on mine. "You will be fine, Tessa," he whispered. His tone was not kind. It was dismissive. "You have always been good at scraping by. You always managed to survive on a little bit of money. It builds character." I looked at his face. I memorized it. I memorized the way his eyes crinkled at the corners, the way his lips stretched back to show his perfect veneered teeth. It was a grin of absolute, unshakable victory. He truly believed he was walking out of this room with his empire intact and his liability removed for the price of a mid-range sedan and a check he would not even miss. Judge Ellison cleared her throat. She looked tired. She had likely seen 1,000 versions of this same scene. The rich husband, the discarded wife, the unequal power dynamic. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at me from the bench. "Ms. Monroe," the judge asked, her voice flat, "do you agree to the terms of this settlement as presented by Mr. Sterling?" The room went silent. The stenographer's fingers hovered over her keys. Grant was already reaching for his watered glass, his body language screaming that this was a done deal. I sat up straight. I placed my hands flat on the table. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was calm. It did not shake. It was carried to the back of the room. Judge Ellison looked at me, waiting. "I cannot agree to this settlement," I continued, "not because of the amount Mr. Langley is offering, but because the premise of the division is factually incorrect." Grant let out a loud, audible sigh. He rolled his eyes, making sure the judge saw it. He thought I was posturing. He thought I was about to ask for alimony or beg to keep the beach house we did not even own. Sterling stood up, looking annoyed. "Your Honor, MS. Monroe has had weeks to review." I cut him off. "My attorney, Mr. Cole, has just filed an amended financial disclosure with the clerk. I said it was signed and submitted this morning. I believe it would be in the interest of fairness for the court and for Mr. Langley to review the updated valuation of the marital estate before any signatures are accepted." The judge raised an eyebrow. "An amendment at the 11th hour, MS. Monroe." I nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. The initial disclosure was incomplete. It failed to list certain assets that have been held separately, but are relevant to the court's understanding of the parties' financial standing." Grant leaned over to Sterling, whispering loudly enough for me to hear. "She probably found a savings bond her grandmother left her, or she's counting her shoe collection. Just ignore it. Let us get this over with." He was still smiling. He was still confident. He thought I was wasting his time. The door to the side of the courtroom opened and the court clerk walked in. She was carrying a document. It was not a single sheet of paper. It was not a thin manila envelope. It was a binder, a white 3-ring binder, 3 thick, heavy enough that the clerk had to use both hands to carry it. She walked over to the defense table and set it down in front of Sterling. The sound was heavy. It sounded like an encyclopedia hitting a desk. Sterling looked at the binder. He looked at the thickness of it. He looked at the spine. Then he looked at Barrett Cole. Barrett was sitting next to me, leaning back in his chair, his face completely expressionless. He gestured casually toward the binder, inviting them to open it. Sterling's expression changed. He was a professional. He knew that you do not produce a 3 binder for a shoe collection. He knew that weight meant data, and data meant danger. He opened the cover. Grant was still leaning back, looking at his watch, checking the time. He was likely calculating if he could make his lunch reservation. Sterling flipped the first page, then the second. I saw his back stiffen. I saw his hand pause in midair. He adjusted his glasses. He leaned closer to the page. He turned to the next tab. He read something, maybe a deed, maybe a tax return, and his head whipped around to look at me. His eyes were wide behind his lenses. He looked like he had just opened a box of chocolates and found a live grenade inside. Grant noticed the shift. He frowned. "What is it?" Grant asked, sounding irritated. "What is she claiming? Did she rack up credit card debt?" Sterling did not answer. He was flipping through the pages faster now, his professional composure crumbling. He looked at the section on income streams. He looked at the section on asset valuation. "Give it to me," Grant snapped. He snatched the binder from Sterling's hands. "This is the moment I relive in my mind when I need to sleep at night." Grant pulled the binder toward him. He was aggressive, impatient. He flipped past the introduction. He flipped past the table of contents. He landed on the summary page. It was a single page formatted like a corporate balance sheet. At the top in bold, black letters, it read Harbaline Holdings, LLC, Consolidated Portfolio Valuation. Grant read the name. His brow furrowed. Harbaline. He likely tried to place the name. Maybe he thought it was a shell company he had forgotten about. Maybe he thought it was a mistake. His eyes scanned down the list. Assets 27 residential and commercial properties. Location tri-state area. Ownership status 100% sole ownership. Tesser Monroe. His finger traced the line. He blinked. He read it again. And then his eyes drifted to the bottom right corner of the page. The bottom line, the number that Arthur, my forensic accountant, had calculated down to the penny, verified by independent auditors and backed by the purchase offer from the Chicago firm. Estimated net equity $27,840,000. Time seemed to warp. The air conditioning hummed. The judge shuffled papers. But at the defense table, everything froze. Grant stared at the number. He did not blink. He did not breathe. His brain was trying to process the impossible equation. Tesser equals 0. Tesser equals nothing. Tesser is just there. And yet, the paper said 27 million. I watched the grin. It did not vanish all at once. It cracked. It started at the corners of his mouth, a slight twitch as the muscles lost their tension. Then, the lips parted, not in a smile, but in a slack-jawed expression of absolute confusion. The light in his eyes, that arrogant, mocking shine went out, replaced by a dull, flat shock. He looked up from the paper. He looked at Sterling. Sterling refused to meet his eye. He was busy reading the purchase offer attached as an exhibit, his face pale. Grant turned his head slowly, mechanically, to look at me. He looked like a man who had walked into his own house and found a stranger sitting in his chair, wearing his clothes, living a life he did not know existed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked back down at the binder. He flipped the page to the buyout letter. He read the offer. He saw the date. He saw that it was addressed to MS. Tesser Monroe, CO. The word seemed to hit him harder than the money. I was not a housewife. I was a peer. I was a shark in his waters, and he had been treating me like a goldfish. His face turned a shade of gray that matched the courtroom walls. The hand that had signed the settlement agreement with such confidence was now gripping the edge of the binder so hard that his knuckles were white. Judge Ellison, who had been waiting patiently, leaned forward. Mr. Sterling, the judge asked, does your client wish to proceed with the current settlement offer, or does this amendment change the landscape of the negotiation? Grant made a noise. It was a strangled, choking sound. Sterling stood up. He looked rattled. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Your Honor, Sterling stammered. My client needs a moment. We were not aware. We had no knowledge of this entity. We need to recess. We need to review the validity of these claims. Grant finally found his voice. It was not the smooth baritone voice of the CEO. It was high and thin. 27 million, he whispered. It was not a question for the court. It was a question for the universe. He looked at me again. The grin was gone, completely gone. In its place was fear, pure, unadulterated fear. He was realizing that the liability he wanted to shed was actually the biggest asset in the room, and he had just spent the last 6 months insulting her intelligence. I looked back at him. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just sat there calm and cold, the ice queen he had created. I leaned into the microphone. I am happy to wait, Your Honor, I said. I know math can be complicated for some people. Grant flinched as if I had slapped him. He slumped back in his chair, the binder open in front of him, the numbers screaming up at him, drowning out every arrogant word he had ever said. Order in the court. Judge Ellison's voice cut through the murmur of the room like a whip. She banged her gavel once, a sharp wooden crack that silenced the whispers of the clerks and the frantic shuffling of papers at the defense table. The judge looked over her spectacles, first at the binder, then at me, and finally at Grant, who looked as if he had just swallowed a lit match. Mr. Cole, Judge Ellison said, turning her gaze to my lawyer. You will explain this immediately. Why is the court receiving a financial disclosure of this magnitude on the day of the settlement hearing? Barrett stood up. He did not look apologetic. He looked like a man unveiling a statue. Your Honor, Barrett began, his voice deep and resonant. The entity in question is Harboline Holdings, LLC. It is a real estate holding company formed, managed, and solely owned by my client, MS. Monroe. For the past 6 years, MS. Monroe has been operating this business independently. He paused, letting the words sink in. The reason for the late filing is twofold. First, as the court is aware, Mr. Langley filed for divorce on the grounds that MS. Monroe was a financial dependent with no assets. We felt it was necessary to allow Mr. Langley to complete his own financial disclosures under oath before correcting the record. Second, The valuation of this portfolio required extensive independent auditing, which was only completed yesterday. Grant stood up. He did not ask for permission. He just shot out of his chair. This is ridiculous. Grant sputtered. His face was flushing a blotchy, angry red. She does not have company. She is a housewife. She takes pottery classes. This is some kind of fraud. She is hiding money she took from me. Sit down, mister. Lindley. Judge Ellison barked. Grant remained standing for a second longer, his finger pointing at me, shaking. Then, seeing the look on the judge's face, he sank back into his chair. He looked at me, his eyes wide and frantic. She does not know how to run a business. He hissed to his lawyer loud enough for the microphone to pick up. She can barely balance the checkbook for the grocery account. Judge Ellison ignored him. She turned to me. Ms. Monroe, take the stand. I walked to the witness box. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. Grant's eyes were burning holes in the side of my head. He was waiting for me to go on a trip. He was waiting for me to stutter. He was waiting for the homemaker to appear so he could dismiss her. I sat down. I placed my hands on my lap. I looked directly at the judge. Ms. Monroe, the judge asked, "Are you the sole owner of Harbourline Holdings?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "And how exactly did a woman with no reported income for 10 years acquire a portfolio valued at nearly $28 million? I took a breath. I did not speak quickly. I spoke with the cadence of a CEO giving a quarterly report. "It began 6 years ago. Your Honor," I said, "I used the savings I had accumulated before my marriage money that was kept in a separate account at a credit union Langley did not use. I purchased a distressed duplex in the industrial district for $42,000. It was a foreclosure. I saw Grant flinch. He knew I had savings, but he thought I spent it on shoes. I renovated it myself. I continued. I learned how to install drywall. I learned how to negotiate with contractors. I rented it out, refinanced it based on the improved value, and used the equity to buy 2 more properties. I repeated this process, the BR method, over and over again. I leveraged debt. I managed cash flow. And I acquired undervalued assets during the market downturn. I looked at Grant. While my husband believed I was at a yoga studio on Tuesday nights, I was meeting with my property managers. While he thought I was at pottery class on weekends, I was overseeing renovations on multifamily units. I built this brick by brick. Sterling Grant's lawyer stood up to cross-examine me. He looked desperate. He needed to find a hole. He needed to prove that this was somehow Grant's money. Ms. Monroe, Sterling said, his voice sharp. "You expect the court to believe that you built a $28 million empire without using a single cent of your husband's money. Northline Dynamics is a very successful company. Surely some of the household funds earned by Mr. Langley leaked into this venture." I leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Sterling," I said coolly, "I have never commingled funds. My forensic accountant has traced every single down payment. Every dollar came from my premarital savings, my inheritance, or the rental income generated by the properties themselves." "But surely," Sterling pressed, "you used the joint credit card for supplies, for paint, for lumber." "No," I said, "I used my own credit. I took out high-interest personal loans in my own name because I refused to touch the marital assets. I assumed all the risk. If I had failed, the debt would have been mine alone. Mr. Langley did not even know the loans existed." I paused and then delivered the blow I had been saving. "In fact, the only financial interaction between my company and Mr. Langley's company was entirely one-sided." Sterling froze. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for the past 3 years, Northline Dynamics has been paying rent on their secondary server facility to Apex Commercial Group." I said, "I own 40% of Apex through Harbourline. So in reality, Mr. Langley has not been funding me. I have been providing him with commercial space." A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Grant's mouth fell open. He looked physically ill. He was realizing that the landlord he complained about raising the rent last year was in fact his wife. I stepped down from the stand. Then Arthur, my forensic accountant, set up an easel. He displayed a series of flowcharts. They were beautiful. They showed the clean, distinct lines of capital, blue lines for Harbor Line, red lines for the marital estate. They never crossed. Grant watched the presentation like a man watching his own autopsy. He saw the timeline. He saw the growth. He saw the undeniable proof that the woman he called useless was actually a financial prodigy. He could not claim I stole it. He could not claim I owed him. When Arthur finished, the room was silent. Judge Ellison took off her glasses. She picked up a piece of paper from the evidence pile. I recognized it immediately. It was the email Barrett had submitted into evidence, the one I had intercepted weeks ago. Mr. Langley, Judge Ellison said. Her voice was dangerously soft. Grant looked up. He looked small. The expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume. Yes, Your Honor, he whispered. I am looking at an email you sent to your business partner, Mr. Harlow Pierce, the judge said. She held the paper up. In it, you describe your wife's role in your life. You wrote, and I quote, "She does not understand business. She is just there." Grant turned a deep shade of crimson. He looked down at his hands. The judge continued reading. You also wrote to your attorney, stating, "She is a liability. I need to shed. She has nothing." Judge Ellison dropped the paper back onto the desk. It landed with a soft slap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. It appears, Mr. Langley, that your assessment of your wife's capabilities was significantly flawed. The judge said dryly, it seems, MS. Monroe was not just there. She was building a portfolio that rivals your own liquid net worth, and she did it while you were busy dismissing her existence. Grant did not speak. He could not. He was stripped bare. The narrative, he had built his entire ego around the genius husband, and the leech wife had just been dismantled in front of a court reporter and his own lawyer. He looked at me, and for the first time there was no superiority in his eyes. There was only the terrifying realization that he had been living with a stranger who was smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than he was. Judge Ellison gathered her papers. In light of this new evidence, the court cannot accept the current settlement agreement. She declared, the division of assets must be completely reevaluated. The court needs to determine how to weigh MS. Monroe's independent success against Mr. Langley's claims of sole contribution to the marital estate. She looked at Grant one last time. And Mr. Langley, I suggest you instruct your counsel to stop treating MS. Monroe like a dependent in need of charity. It appears she's the one who could afford to be charitable to you. The gavel banged. The court is in recess. Grant stayed in his chair. He did not move as his lawyer started packing up the briefcase with frantic energy. He just sat there staring at the empty space where his victory used to be. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I picked up my purse. I did not look back at him. I walked out of the courtroom, the sound of my heels clicking on the floor, sounding like the ticking of a clock that had finally run out. The recess was supposed to be 15 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime compressed into a ticking clock. I walked out of the courtroom and into the long marble corridor. The air out here was cooler, smelling of floor wax and the stale coffee from the vending machines down the hall. I needed a moment to breathe. I needed to let the adrenaline that was coursing through my veins settle into something manageable. I did not get that moment. I heard heavy, rapid footsteps behind me. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. The cadence was familiar, the impatient, entitled stride of a man who expects the world to stop when he moves. Tesser Grant called out. I stopped, but I did not turn. I felt his hand grab my upper arm. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into the fabric of my blazer. It was not a caress. It was a clamp. He spun me around. Grant looked deranged. The perfectly gelled hair was slightly disheveled. His tie was crooked. The confident golden boy CEO was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he had just watched his house burn down while he was still inside it. How he demanded, his voice, a harsh whisper. How long have you been hiding this $27 million, Tesser? How did you even? I looked down at his hand on my arm. I stared at it until he realized what he was doing and let go, stepping back as if he had been burned. I smoothed my sleeve. I did not hide it. Grant, I said. My voice was as cold as the marble floor beneath our feet. I operated under my own name. I filed my own taxes. I did it right under your nose, but you never looked down long enough to see it." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing in a small, tight circle. 27 million, he repeated, as if the number was a foreign language he was trying to learn. "Have you bought real estate? You the woman who panic buys scented candles." I smiled. It was a faint, sharp thing. "While you were busy asking Harlow Pierce what role she played in your company, I was busy building a role for myself." I said, "While you were telling your friends I was just there, I was out there. Grant, I was negotiating. I was renovating. I was building equity." Grant stopped pacing. He looked at me and I saw the gears in his head turning. The shock was fading, replaced by the calculating glimmer I knew so well. He was a businessman first and last. He was looking at the valuation, and he was seeing an opportunity. He took a step closer. His face softened. He put on the mask, the charming, persuasive mask he used to close deals. "Tesser, look," he said, lowering his voice to a confidential murmur. Maybe we have been looking at this all wrong. This is a misunderstanding. A massive misunderstanding." He reached out, trying to take my hand, but I kept them firmly at my sides. "Think about it," he said, his eyes widening with faint excitement. "You have the real estate portfolio. I have the tech infrastructure. If we combine them, if we merge Harbor Line with Northine's facility management division, we could be unstoppable. We would be a power couple. The press would eat it up. The IPO would double in value." I stared at him in disbelief. Even now, standing in the ruins of our marriage, he was trying to acquire me. He did not see a wife who was hurt. He saw a subsidiary he wanted to absorb. "We can fix this," he urged. "We can withdraw the divorce papers. We can start over. I did not know you were capable of this. Now that I know things will be different, I will respect you. We can be partners. Real partners." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Partners?" I asked. "And how would you introduce me to your investors, Grant? Would you tell them I am the co-CEO, or would you tell them, 'Oh, she is just there signing some meaningless papers'?" Grant flinched. The quote hit its mark. "That was just torque," he pleaded. I was stressed. "The IPO pressure is killing me. You know how I get when I'm cornered." I did not mean it. "I love you, Tesser." I looked into his eyes, searching for even a speck of truth. I saw panic. I saw greed. I saw regret. But the regret was not for losing me. The regret was for losing access to $28 million of leverage. "You do not love me, Grant," I said quietly. "You love the reflection of yourself you see in my eyes. And now that the reflection is holding a balance sheet that is bigger than yours, you do not know how to handle it." I took a step back. "You taught me a very expensive lesson, Grant," I said. "You taught me that I should never ever hand over my life to someone who sees me as invisible. I learned that lesson well, and now I am handing in my homework." I turned around and walked back toward the courtroom doors. "Tesser," he called after me, his voice cracking. "Tesser, do not do this. Think about the company." I did not stop. When we re-entered the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The clerks were looking at me differently. Even Sterling Grant's lawyer would not meet my eyes. Judge Ellison returned to the bench. She looked fresh, composed, and ready to deliver a verdict that would echo. "Please be seated," she said. Grant slumped into his chair. He looked defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He knew deep down that his charm would not work on a spreadsheet. "The court has reviewed the amended financial disclosure submitted by Ms. Monroe as well as the initial filings by Mr. R. Langley," Judge Ellison began. She picked up a document and adjusted her glasses. "It is the opinion of this court that Mr. Langley's initial financial disclosure was at best negligent and at worst a deliberate attempt to conceal assets. The transfer of stock options to a trust in his sister's name and the undisclosed Nevada account indicate a pattern of bad faith." Grant put his head in his hands. Conversely, the judge continued, "Ms. Monroe has provided exhaustive documentation proving that Harbor Line Holdings was established and maintained using separate property. The forensic accounting creates a clear, unbroken chain of title. Therefore, the court rules that Harbor Line Holdings is the sole separate property of Ms. Monroe." I let out a breath. I did not know I was holding. It was mine. The sleepless nights, the sawdust, the fear, it was all mine. However, the judge said, looking at Grant, because Mr. Langley attempted to minimize the marital estate to the detriment of his spouse, the court is ordering an unequal division of the remaining marital assets. Ms. Monroe will be awarded 60% of the liquid assets currently held in joint accounts. She paused and then delivered the final blow. Furthermore, regarding the Northline Dynamics shares, the court is not blind to the fact that Ms. Monroe contributed significantly to the early formation of the company, a fact Mr. Langley has attempted to erase from the record. While we cannot award her founder status retroactively, we are awarding her 15% of Mr. Langley's personal stock holdings, effective immediately with no lockup period. Grant's head snapped up. 15%, he choked out. It gives her a voting block that could stall the IPO. Judge Ellison looked at him cold and hard. Then perhaps, Mr. Langley, you should have thought about that before you told the court your wife was worth nothing. The gavel banged. Case closed. Grant sat there frozen. The silence around him was absolute. The grin, the wide-eared grin that he had worn when he signed the papers an hour ago, was a distant memory. He looked like a man who had reached for a crown and grabbed a live wire instead. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his face, only a profound, hollow confusion. He still did not understand how it had happened. He still did not understand that you cannot treat a person like a shadow and expect them not to eventually darken your door. I stood up. I shook hands with Barrett. Thank you, I whispered. He smiled. You did the work, Tesser. I just turned on the lights. I picked up the heavy white binder. I held it against my chest, not like a shield, but like a trophy. I walked out of the courtroom. I walked past Grant without a word. I walked past Sterling, who was frantically typing on his phone, likely trying to figure out how to explain this disaster to the Northline board. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse and stepped out onto the wide stone steps. The sun was blinding. It was late afternoon, and the city was bathed in a golden, hazy light. The air smelled of exhaust and spring flowers. It smelled like freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that felt cleaner than it had in 10 years. I did not have a husband. I did not have a power couple status. I did not have the social calendar of a CEO's wife. I had 27 buildings. I had $28 million. And most importantly, I had my name back. I walked down the steps, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the concrete. I stopped at the bottom and looked across the street. There on the corner was a beautiful, dilapidated old brick building. It used to be a textile factory. It had shattered windows and graffiti on the walls, but on the front, glinting in the sunlight, was a brand new sign for sale. I smiled, a real smile, not the polite smile of a wife, but the hungry smile of a builder. I shifted the binder to my other arm and reached for my phone. I dialed Jade. She answered on the first ring. Well, it is over. I said we won. I heard Jade scream with joy on the other end of the line. And Jade, I added, looking at the brick building across the street. Yeah, get the checkbook ready, I said. I think I just found our headquarters. I hung up the phone and stepped off the curb, walking toward the future. The question echoed in my mind, the final thought before I crossed the street into my new life. If one day the person who treated you like you were invisible had to face your true value in front of the whole world, would you show them the faded copy they expected, or would you show them the masterpiece they never believed was real? That is where my story ends. But for Tesser Monroe, the empire is just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So, please drop a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Grant's downfall. Let's chat. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Azad Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.